They called her a diarist, a witness, a quiet voice carried across generations, a young girl whose words outlived the world she knew. Tonight, we explore the biography of Anne Frank. You're listening to Boring Biography, a sleep story designed for calm listening and gentle rest. Settle in, breathe slowly, and let the day fade into silence. She never lived to see the end of the war, yet her story unfolded in hidden rooms and whispered footsteps. Her world grew smaller, while history outside grew louder. Through ordinary days, small hopes, and careful writing, she left behind a record of life lived quietly in extraordinary times. Imagine soft rain against a rooftop, the turning of pages in dim light, the stillness of a city under curfew. Let the story begin. Anne Frank was born Anneliese Marie Frank in the German city of Frankfurt to her parents, Edith and Otto Frank. She grew up in a household that included her older sister Margot. The family belonged to the Reform Jewish community and lived in an environment where Jewish and non-Jewish neighbors shared daily life. Her parents valued education and books, and their home contained a large library. Reading was encouraged from an early age, and quiet study was part of the family's routine. At the time of her birth, the family lived in a rented home in Frankfurt, occupying 2 floors of a residential building in a calm neighborhood. A few years later, they moved to another house in a pleasant district known as the Poets' Quarter, an area of tree-lined streets and orderly homes. Both houses remained standing long after the family had left them. When political change began to reshape Germany, the family's daily life became uncertain. After a national election brought a new government to power, Anne's mother took the children to stay with their grandmother in the city of Aachen. His father remained in Frankfurt for a time, arranging plans for the family's future. Soon afterward, he relocated to Amsterdam to begin a business selling fruit-based products and to prepare a new home. Her mother traveled between cities, gradually organizing the move. She found an apartment in a residential neighborhood of Amsterdam, where many German Jewish families were beginning to settle. Later that year, Anne's mother joined her husband, and Margot followed soon after. Anne remained with her grandmother for several months before finally traveling to Amsterdam, where the family was reunited and began a new chapter of their lives. The Frank family was part of a larger movement of Jewish families who left Germany during the 1930s in response to growing political pressure and uncertainty. After settling in Amsterdam, Anne and her sister Margot were enrolled in school. Margot attended a public school and gradually adjusted to the Dutch language, eventually performing well in her studies. Anne began attending a Montessori school and soon adapted to the new environment. She met classmates and formed friendships, including one with a girl who would remain important to her in later years. Many years afterward, the school was renamed in her memory. During this period, Otto Frank expanded his business activities and founded a second company dealing in spices and food ingredients. The business employed staff who, like the Frank family, had left Germany. The household later grew when Anne's grandmother moved in with the family and lived with them for several years. The situation in the Netherlands changed when German forces occupied the country. New regulations were introduced that required Jewish citizens to register and gradually restricted their participation in public life. Separation and limitations followed step by step. Otto Frank explored the possibility of emigrating again, hoping to move the family to the United States, but the process was interrupted when wartime events destroyed the consulate handling their application. During this time, Anne was filmed briefly while watching a wedding ceremony from the balcony of her apartment. This short recording became the only known moving image of her lifetime. Soon afterward, new school rules required Jewish children to attend separate schools. Anne and Margot were transferred to a Jewish secondary school in Amsterdam, where they continued their education under the new restrictions. For her 13th birthday, Anne received a small autograph book with a red and white checkered cover and a lock on the front. She chose to use it as a diary and gave it the name Kitty. She began writing in it soon after receiving it. In one early entry, she described the growing number of rules and restrictions affecting Jewish families in the Netherlands. During that same period, deportations of Jewish residents began. Otto and Edith Frank had already been preparing a plan for the family to go into hiding. The timetable changed suddenly when Margot received an official notice ordering her to report for relocation to a labor camp. The family moved their plans forward and prepared to leave earlier than intended. Before going into hiding, Anne gave several personal belongings to a close friend and neighbor, including a book, a tea set, and a small collection of marbles. When the family left their apartment, they also left a note asking the neighbor to care for their cat. According to later recollections, Anne expressed concern about the safety of her marbles and asked that they be kept safe for the time being. On a Monday morning, the Frank family quietly left their apartment and moved into a concealed hiding place behind an office building along the Prinsengracht Canal. The rooms were located in a 3-level rear section of the building and were reached through a doorway above the office workspace. To avoid suspicion, the family left their home in disarray and placed a note suggesting they had fled the country. Because Jewish residents were no longer allowed to use public transport, the journey to the building was made on foot, while Margot traveled separately by bicycle. The entrance to the hidden rooms was later concealed behind a movable bookcase. This concealed doorway separated the hidden living space from the working offices below and helped keep the occupants from being discovered. A small group of trusted office workers knew about the people in hiding. These helpers provided food, supplies, and news from the outside world. They risked severe punishment for offering assistance, yet continued to visit regularly and support the household. Their visits became an important connection to daily life beyond the building and helped maintain morale during long periods of isolation. Soon after the family settled in, additional people joined them in the confined space. Another family moved in during the summer, followed later by a dentist who was a family friend. The shared living conditions were crowded and required careful scheduling of daily routines. Limited space, limited food, and constant fear created tension among the occupants. Anne wrote about disagreements, personal frustrations, and the challenges of living in close quarters. Over time, she developed changing relationships with those around her. She formed a friendship with one of the young residents and wrote about the emotions and uncertainties of adolescence under unusual circumstances. She also grew close to the helpers who visited the annex, looking forward to their daily presence and conversations. Their visits provided moments of normalcy within an otherwise restricted and hidden life. In her writing, Anne examined her relationships with the members of her family and the strong differences in each of their personalities. She felt especially close to her father, a bond he later reflected on by saying that he had always found it easier to connect with Anne than with Margot, who was more attached to their mother. He believed this difference may have come from the fact that Margot rarely showed her feelings and did not seem to struggle with mood swings in the same way Anne did, which meant she appeared to need less emotional support. The Frank sisters gradually formed a closer relationship during the period of hiding than they had shared before. Even so, Anne sometimes admitted to feeling jealous of Margot, particularly when others in the household compared them and criticized Anne for not being as gentle or calm as her sister. As time passed and Anne matured, the distance between them lessened, and they began to confide in each other more openly. In one of her diary entries, Anne described how Margot had become kinder and more understanding, and how she had begun to feel that Margot no longer treated her as a child who did not matter. She wrote that Margot was becoming a real friend. Anne frequently wrote about her complicated relationship with her mother and described her feelings with unusual honesty. At times, she recorded strong frustration and distance, expressing that she felt misunderstood and unable to speak openly about her concerns. Later, when she reread and revised her diary, she became ashamed of the harsh tone of her earlier words. With time and reflection, she came to understand that their difficulties had grown out of misunderstandings on both sides. She realized that she had added to her mother's suffering and began to approach her with greater tolerance and respect. Throughout the period in hiding, both Anne and Margot continued their education as much as possible. Margot enrolled in a correspondence course in Latin using the name of one of the helpers and received excellent marks. Anne spent much of her time reading, studying, and writing. She regularly revised her diary entries and began to treat her writing more seriously. In addition to recording daily events, she wrote about her thoughts, beliefs, dreams, and ambitions. The diary became a place where she could express feelings she did not feel able to share with anyone else. As her confidence grew, she began to write about more abstract subjects, including her beliefs about God and her ideas about human nature. She developed a strong ambition to become a journalist and writer, and wrote openly about her desire to create work that would have lasting value. She described writing as a way to release her worries and restore her spirits, and expressed a hope that her words might allow her to continue living in some way, even after her death. She continued writing regularly until her final diary entry at the beginning of August. On the morning of August 4th, 1944, the secret annex was discovered and entered by a group of German uniformed police, led by an officer of the Sicherheitsdienst. The people who had been hiding there were arrested and taken away for questioning. They were brought to a security headquarters where they were interrogated and held overnight. The following day, they were transferred to a detention facility in Amsterdam, a crowded prison where many detainees were held under difficult conditions. After several days, they were transported to a transit camp in the Netherlands, through which large numbers of Jewish prisoners had already passed. Because they had been found in hiding, they were treated as criminals and assigned to a punishment section where they were required to perform hard labor. The helpers who had assisted the group were also affected. 2 of the office workers were arrested and taken to a penal camp for those considered enemies of the regime. One was released after several weeks, while the other remained in different camps until the end of the war. Another helper was questioned and threatened, but was not detained. One secretary managed to avoid arrest and later returned to the hiding place with another helper. Inside the rooms, they found papers and belongings scattered across the floor. Among these items were Anne's diary pages and family photograph albums. They gathered the materials and kept them safe, hoping to return them after the war. Shortly afterward, one of the helpers attempted to negotiate the prisoner's release by offering money to the officer involved in the arrest, but the attempt was unsuccessful. There have been many theories and investigations over the decades attempting to explain how the inhabitants of the secret annex were discovered, yet no single explanation has ever been definitively proven. the question has remained open for historians, journalists, and researchers who have continued to revisit the evidence, testimonies, and wartime records in an effort to understand the circumstances surrounding the arrest. One theory emerged from a biography written by Flemish journalist Jeroen de Bruyne, together with Joop van Wyk, the youngest son of one of the helpers. In this account, they proposed that a young woman connected to the building may have betrayed the people in hiding. She had been known to sympathize with the occupying regime and had left the Netherlands to live with a German officer before later returning to Amsterdam. According to the authors, tensions had existed within the family because she strongly disapproved of the help being given to Jewish people. Her father had played an important role in constructing the concealed bookcase that hid the entrance to the secret annex, and he continued to act as a quiet observer of the building. During a family argument, she was said to have shouted words suggesting hostility toward those being sheltered. Adding to the suspicion, the officer who carried out the arrest reportedly remarked that the informer had sounded like a young woman. While this theory attracted attention, it remained one possibility among many and could not be proven conclusively. In 2016, new research published by the Anne Frank House offered a different perspective. Rather than focusing solely on betrayal, the report suggested that the raid may have resulted from an investigation into ration card fraud. During the war, illegal trading of ration cards was widespread and heavily investigated by authorities. The building where the secret annex was located was also the site of business activities connected to Otto Frank's company, and these activities could have drawn official scrutiny. According to this research, the authorities may have entered the building while investigating unrelated illegal activities and discovered the hidden rooms by chance. The report did not rule out the possibility of betrayal, but emphasized that other explanations should be considered equally plausible. Another theory gained attention in a later publication that suggested a Dutch collaborator who had betrayed numerous Jewish people might have been responsible. According to this account, a resistance worker claimed to have witnessed the collaborator visiting the building and discussing the Prinsengracht address with intelligence officials. However, historians pointed out that many victims of this collaborator had lived in the same neighborhood, which made the connection uncertain and inconclusive. In early 2022, a new investigation involving modern research techniques proposed that a member of the Amsterdam Jewish Council may have provided information to the authorities in order to protect his own family. The theory was widely publicized and presented as a possible solution to the long-standing mystery. However, soon after publication, historians and scholars raised strong objections. Experts questioned the evidence and described it as insufficient and based on weak assumptions. Critics argued that there was no reliable proof that the Jewish Council possessed lists of hiding places or that such information had been shared. The controversy grew when the Dutch publisher of the book issued an internal apology, acknowledging that greater scrutiny should have been applied before publication. Plans to continue printing the book were paused while questions about the research were addressed. Further analysis by historians concluded that several sources used in the investigation had been misinterpreted or presented inaccurately. As a result, the Dutch edition of the book was withdrawn. Later that same year, a detailed research report examined the sources and annotations used in the investigation and argued that the theory relied on distorted or unreliable material. The report suggested that some historical statements had been altered or selectively used to support the conclusion. Additional claims about the suspected informant were traced back to a collaborator whose credibility was already in doubt. plans to publish a translation of the book were canceled soon afterward. Despite decades of research and repeated investigations, the question of how the secret annex was discovered remains unresolved. Historians generally agree that the available evidence does not allow for a definitive conclusion. The discovery may have been the result of betrayal, chance investigation, or a combination of factors that can no longer be fully reconstructed. The uncertainty remains part of the historical record, reflecting the difficulty of reconstructing events that took place under the secrecy and fear of wartime occupation. As further research continued, new evidence gradually strengthened the possibility that the discovery of the secret annex may not have resulted from a deliberate betrayal. Investigations supported by the Anne Frank Foundation suggested that the raid could have happened by chance during a broader operation aimed at ration card trafficking. Although the idea of betrayal has never been completely ruled out, this newer interpretation has gained credibility among many researchers. Statements made by the arresting officer decades after the war were found to be inconsistent and unreliable, which further weakened earlier claims about an anonymous tip-off. The police unit that entered the building was not primarily assigned to track down hidden Jewish people. Instead, their work focused largely on financial crimes and illegal trade. During the occupation, ration cards were essential for obtaining food and supplies, and black market activity surrounding them was widespread. The company operating from the building at Prinsengracht had also been forced to rely on black market sources to obtain supplies for the people in hiding. In wartime conditions, hiding fugitives and engaging in ration card fraud often became connected activities. Investigating one could easily lead to the discovery of the other. Earlier in the year, 2 employees of the company had been arrested after being found with a large number of ration cards. This event likely attracted official attention to the business and may have led to further investigation of the premises. It is considered very likely that the later raid was a continuation of this earlier case, rather than a targeted search for hidden individuals. When officers arrived at the building, they conducted a thorough search of the business premises. They inspected storage areas, opened containers, and examined supplies in detail. The search reportedly lasted for a long period of time before the concealed bookcase was discovered. Only after moving the bookcase did they uncover the hidden passage leading to the secret annex. The length and nature of the search has led many researchers to question the idea of a detailed tip-off. If the officers had known in advance exactly what they were looking for and where to find it, the operation would likely have been shorter and more direct. The fact that the discovery occurred only after an extended inspection suggests that the hidden rooms may have been found unexpectedly during the investigation. For these reasons, many historians now consider it plausible that the secret annex was discovered as an unintended consequence of an investigation into ration card fraud and black market activity. While the possibility of betrayal cannot be completely dismissed, the evidence increasingly points toward a chance discovery during a routine investigation. On the 3rd of September 1944, the group from the secret annex was deported from the Westerbork transit camp on the final transport leaving for Auschwitz. The journey lasted several days. Among the passengers on the same train was a former schoolmate who had known Anne and Margot in Amsterdam. After arriving at the camp, she later recalled seeing Anne, Margot, and their mother regularly and would eventually share her memories in later interviews and documentaries. Upon arrival at Auschwitz, the prisoners were separated immediately. Men were divided from women and children, and Otto Frank was separated from his family. Prisoners judged capable of labor were admitted into the camp, while those considered unfit were killed soon after arrival. A large portion of the transport was sent directly to the gas chambers, including all children younger than 15. Anne, having recently reached that age, was among the youngest, allowed to enter the camp as a labor prisoner. She later believed that her father had likely died soon after the separation. Like other women and girls admitted to the camp, Anne was forced to undergo disinfection procedures, had her head shaved, and received a number tattooed on her arm. Daily life in the camp involved forced labor and harsh conditions. Prisoners worked during the day and were crowded into barracks at night. Disease spread quickly throughout the camp. Witnesses later recalled that Anne sometimes appeared withdrawn and distressed, especially when she saw children being taken away. Others remembered her strength and determination. She worked to obtain extra food for her mother and sister whenever possible. Illness spread rapidly, and Anne developed a severe skin infection. The sisters were later moved to an infirmary where conditions remained extremely difficult. Their mother gave up much of her own food in an effort to support her daughters. In the autumn, plans were made to transfer prisoners to another labor camp. Anne was unable to travel because of her illness, and her mother and sister chose to remain with her. Later that year, a new selection took place, and thousands of women were transported to Bergen-Belsen. Anne and Margot were among those transferred, while their mother remained behind and later died. At Bergen-Belsen, overcrowding and disease caused conditions to deteriorate rapidly. Anne was briefly reunited with two friends from Amsterdam who were also imprisoned in the camp. Both later survived the war and recalled their meetings with her. They described her as thin, ill, and exhausted, yet still able to speak about her hopes. Anne shared that she wished to publish a book based on her diary after the war. She believed that her parents had died and expressed deep sadness and despair. These meetings would become the final recorded accounts of her life. Anne Frank died in the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in either February or March of 1945, although the exact date of her death was never recorded. The circumstances of her final weeks are known only through the memories of survivors and later historical research. While the precise medical cause was never officially documented, strong evidence suggests that she died during a severe typhus epidemic that spread rapidly through the overcrowded camp. The disease moved quickly among prisoners whose bodies had already been weakened by hunger, exhaustion, and harsh living conditions. Survivors later described the epidemic as devastating. One woman who had known Anne in the camp recalled that Anne had become feverish and delirious, suffering from intense illness and weakness. She remembered bringing Anne water so that she could wash, a small act of care in a place where basic hygiene had become almost impossible. Those who lived through the epidemic spoke of the speed with which disease spread and the scale of the suffering. Prisoners were dying in large numbers every day, and the camp's limited medical facilities were overwhelmed. In addition to typhus, other illnesses such as typhoid fever were widespread, further worsening the already dire situation. Witnesses later testified that Margot Frank, who had also become severely weakened, fell from her bunk and died shortly afterward. Anne is believed to have died only a day after her sister. For many years, it was widely assumed that their deaths occurred only weeks before British forces liberated the camp in April. Later research, however, suggested that the sisters may have died earlier than previously believed, possibly in February, based on eyewitness accounts and the known progression of untreated typhus. After their deaths, Anne and Margot were buried together in a mass grave, as was common for the many victims who died in the camp during that time. In the years following the war, the full scale of the tragedy experienced by Jewish communities in the Netherlands became clearer. Of the more than 100,000 Jews deported from the country during the occupation, only a small portion survived the war. Many others had attempted to hide within the Netherlands with the help of friends, neighbors, and members of the resistance. Among those who remained in hiding, a significant number survived, though the risks had been immense for both those in hiding and those who helped them. Otto Frank survived his imprisonment in Auschwitz. After the war ended, he made the long journey back to Amsterdam and stayed with the people who had helped shelter his family during their years in hiding. At first, he continued to hope that his daughters might still be alive. During his return, he learned that his wife Edith had died. In the weeks that followed, he gradually received confirmation that both Margot and Anne had also died in the camps. After learning of their deaths, Otto sought to discover what had happened to the many friends and acquaintances mentioned in Anne's diary. He found that many had not survived the war, though some of their friends and extended family members had managed to escape Europe before the conflict, or survive in hiding. These discoveries brought both sorrow and relief, as the stories of survival and loss slowly came together in the years after the war ended. In July 1945, after the war had ended and survivors slowly began returning home, confirmation of the deaths of Anne and Margot Frank finally reached their father. Two sisters who had been imprisoned with them in Bergen-Belsen confirmed that both girls had died in the camp. Shortly afterward, Miep Gies gave Otto Frank the materials she had carefully saved during the war. These included Anne's notebooks, the red and white checkered diary she had received for her birthday, and a bundle of loose pages that had been gathered from the floor of the secret annex after the arrest. Miep and Bep Voskuil had preserved these papers with the hope that one day they could return them to Anne. Otto Frank later explained that he had not realized how detailed and carefully written his daughter's diary had been. Reading it became a deeply emotional experience. Many of the events described were familiar to him, and he remembered hearing Anne read aloud some of the lighter and more humorous passages during their time in hiding. Yet the diary also revealed a private world he had never fully seen. Through her writing, he discovered the depth of her thoughts, her struggles, and her reflections that she had kept to herself. Anne had originally written the diary as a private record of her thoughts and daily life. She often stated that she never intended for anyone else to read it. Over time, however, her ambitions began to change. She described her life in hiding, the people around her, and the conditions they faced, while also expressing a growing desire to become a writer. In 1944, she heard a radio broadcast by a member of the Dutch government in exile who spoke about preserving documents that recorded the experiences of people living under occupation. This announcement inspired her to revise her diary with the intention of publishing it after the war. Anne began editing her work, rewriting sections, removing passages, and expanding others. She supplemented the original diary with additional notebooks and loose sheets of paper. To protect the identities of those in hiding and those who helped them, she created pseudonyms for many of the people she wrote about. Her revised entries were addressed to a fictional friend named Kitty, a character from a series of books she enjoyed reading. After reading the diary, Otto Frank began considering the possibility of publication. He prepared a manuscript using both Anne's original diary and her edited version. While he restored the real names of family members, he kept the pseudonyms she had created for others. He first shared the manuscript with a historian, who then passed it to her husband. He wrote an article about the diary that was published in a Dutch newspaper. The article attracted attention from publishers and led to the diary's first publication in the Netherlands in the late 1940s. The book was reprinted several times within a few years. Translations soon followed. The diary appeared in Germany and France, and later in the United Kingdom and the United States. In America, it received strong reviews and wide readership. In the United Kingdom, it initially struggled to find an audience, but its success grew over time. In Japan, the diary achieved remarkable popularity and became widely read, with many readers identifying Anne as a symbol of the loss of youth during wartime. The story later reached new audiences through adaptations for the stage and film. A theatrical version premiered in New York and received major awards. A film adaptation followed and achieved both critical and commercial success. Over time, the diary became part of school curricula in many countries, introducing new generations of readers to Anne's writing. Years later, additional pages from the diary that had not been included in early editions came to light. These pages contained more personal reflections, including comments about her parents' relationship and her feelings toward her mother. After discussions about ownership and publication rights, the pages were returned to the official archive and included in later editions of the diary. Through these developments, Anne Frank's writing continued to reach new audiences and remained an important historical and literary work. The diary was widely praised for its literary quality as well as its historical significance. Commentators noted that Anne's writing showed a strong sense of narrative structure and emotional depth. The dramatist Meyer Levin remarked that she was able to sustain the tension of a carefully constructed story, and he became so impressed by her work that he later collaborated with Otto Frank on a stage adaptation. The Gyn poet John Berryman described the diary as a rare and powerful portrayal of a young person growing into maturity, written with a style that was precise, direct, and deeply honest. In the introduction to the first American edition, Eleanor Roosevelt described the diary as one of the most moving reflections on war and its effects on human life that she had ever read. In a speech delivered in the early 1960s, John F. Kennedy stated that among the many voices that have spoken about human dignity during times of suffering, Anne Frank's voice remained one of the most compelling. The writer Ilya Ehrenberg expressed a similar sentiment, noting that her words seemed to speak on behalf of millions who had died, even though she had been an ordinary young girl. As time passed, Anne Frank's reputation grew beyond her identity as a diarist. She came to be seen both as a writer and as a symbol of the Holocaust, and more broadly, as a representative of persecution and resilience. Public figures and leaders often referred to her writing in speeches and reflections on humanitarian issues. During an award acceptance speech in the 1990s, Hillary Clinton read from the diary and spoke about its message against indifference and its relevance to contemporary conflicts. Nelson Mandela also spoke about the diary, recalling that he had read it while imprisoned and had drawn encouragement from Anne's courage and hope. He compared her resistance to oppression with his own struggle against apartheid. Václav Havel similarly observed that Anne Frank's legacy continued to speak to changing political and social realities. Some writers and survivors reflected on the way Anne's story came to represent the experiences of millions. Primo Levi observed that a single individual story often touches people more deeply than statistics about vast numbers of victims. Miep Gies expressed a related view, emphasizing that while Anne's story helped people understand the scale of the tragedy, her life should still be remembered as an individual experience rather than a symbol that replaces the millions who died. Otto Frank spent the rest of his life caring for and promoting his daughter's legacy. He reflected on the unusual role he had taken on as the parent of a famous child and noted that readers from many backgrounds found something personal in the diary. Simon Wiesenthal suggested that the diary helped raise awareness of the Holocaust in a way that formal trials and historical records had not. because readers could recognize their own families and lives in Anne's story. By the end of the 20th century, Anne Frank had become one of the most recognized figures of the century. A major international magazine included her among the most influential people of the era, describing her as a symbol of the individual voice confronting the destructive forces of history. Writers and critics often noted that the lasting impact of her story came not only from the events she described, but also from the quality of her writing, which revealed a remarkable ability for reflection, honesty, and self-understanding at a young age. After the diary became widely known and translated into multiple languages during the late 1950s, a number of allegations began to appear, questioning its authenticity and contents. Some of the earliest published criticisms came from Sweden and Norway. In the late 1950s, a magazine connected to a Swedish neo-fascist organization published an article by a Danish author who had previously written anti-Semitic commentary. In this article, he claimed that the diary had not been written by Anne Frank and suggested that another writer had been responsible. These claims marked the beginning of a long series of challenges to the diary's authenticity. Around the same time, public interest in the story continued to grow through stage performances based on the diary. At one performance in Vienna, a group of protesters confronted a well-known Nazi hunter and demanded proof that Anne Frank had existed. This challenge led him to search for the officer who had arrested the family. Several years later, he located the former officer and interviewed him. During the interview, the officer admitted his role in the arrest and identified Anne from a photograph as one of the individuals taken from the hiding place. He also described the events of the arrest and confirmed details that had previously been reported by witnesses. Otto Frank responded to other accusations through legal action. In the late 1950s, he filed a lawsuit against a teacher who had published claims that the diary was a forgery. A court examined the diary and compared the handwriting with letters known to have been written by Anne. The handwriting was confirmed to match, and the diary was declared genuine. The teacher later withdrew his claims, and the case was not pursued further. In the following decades, additional accusations appeared in pamphlets and publications claiming that the diary was fabricated. Otto Frank again pursued legal action against those promoting these claims. Courts ruled that continued publication of such statements could result in significant fines and imprisonment. Some individuals who distributed pamphlets repeating the allegations were prosecuted, fined, or sentenced to prison, though some appeals later reduced or dismissed sentences. After Otto Frank's death, the original diary and related materials were left to a National Institute for War Documentation. A forensic examination was commissioned to study the documents in detail. Specialists compared the handwriting with verified samples, and they analyzed the paper, glue, and ink used in the notebooks and loose pages. The materials were found to be consistent with those available during the wartime period in which the diary had been written. The investigators concluded that the diary was authentic, and their findings were published in a comprehensive scholarly edition. In the early 1990s, further publications again attempted to revive claims that the diary had been written by someone else. These publications repeated earlier allegations about style and circumstances. In response, organizations dedicated to preserving Anne Frank's legacy initiated legal action to prevent further distribution of these claims. A court later ruled in their favor, prohibiting continued denial of the diary's authenticity and imposing financial penalties for violations. Through court rulings, forensic analysis, and historical research, the authenticity of Anne Frank's diary has been repeatedly examined and affirmed. The diary remains recognized as a genuine historical document and a significant literary work. Since the original publication of the diary, additional sections that had once been removed or edited have gradually been uncovered and incorporated into later editions. These newly revealed passages include Anne's reflections on her developing body, her curiosity about sexuality, her exploration of her genitalia, and her thoughts about menstruation and adolescence. Their inclusion has provided a more complete and nuanced understanding of her growth during the years she spent in hiding. Following the resolution of an ownership dispute in 2001, further restored editions also incorporated pages that Otto Frank had removed before the first publication. These pages contained Anne's candid observations about the strained nature of her parents' marriage and her complicated and often difficult relationship with her mother. In 2018, 2 additional pages that Anne had previously covered with brown paper were carefully deciphered. These pages revealed an attempt to explain sex education in her own words and included several jokes of a mildly risque nature. Together, these additions broadened the public's understanding of Anne Frank as a developing teenager whose private reflections extended far beyond the wartime narrative for which she was initially known. The preservation of Anne Frank's memory and legacy began in earnest after the war. On the 3rd of May, 1957, a group of Dutch citizens, including Otto Frank, founded the Anne Frank Foundation, Anne Frank Stichting. Their goal was to prevent the demolition of the building at Prinsengracht and to transform it into a place that could be visited by the public. The Anne Frank House officially opened on the 3rd of May, 1960. It included the Opekta warehouse and offices, as well as the secret annex. The rooms were intentionally left unfurnished so that visitors could walk through the empty spaces and imagine the conditions under which the occupants had lived in hiding. The Anne Frank House expanded its mission over time. It began offering exhibitions and providing information through the internet. A walkway from the room that once belonged to Peter Van Pels connects the original building to neighboring structures purchased by the foundation. These additional buildings are used to house the diary and rotating exhibitions that explore both the Holocaust and contemporary issues related to racism and intolerance. Between 2011 and 2020, the museum received an average of 1.2 million visitors each year, making it one of Amsterdam's most visited tourist attractions. In 1963, Otto Frank and his second wife, Elfriede Geiringer Markowitz, established the Anne Frank Fonds in Basel, Switzerland. Otto Frank later willed the copyright of the diary to the Fonds, stipulating that the first 80,000 Swiss francs in annual income should be distributed to his heirs. The Fonds represents the Frank family and administers rights related to Anne's writings, Otto Frank's writings, and the family's correspondence. It supports educational initiatives that promote awareness of racism and intolerance. In 2003, the Fonds loaned documents to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington for an exhibition. Its annual report that year described projects supported across Germany, Israel, India, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and the United States. In 1997, the Anne Frank Educational Center opened in Frankfurt's Dornbusch district, where Anne had lived until 1934. The center provides a space for young people and adults to learn about the history of National Socialism and to discuss its ongoing relevance. The apartment on Merwedeplein in Amsterdam, where the Frank family lived between 1933 and 1942, remained privately owned until the early 2000s. After appearing in a television documentary and being found in poor condition, the building was purchased by a Dutch housing corporation. Using photographs and letters from the Frank family, the apartment was restored to its 1930s appearance. The restoration opened in 2005. Each year, a writer who cannot write freely in their home country is invited to live and work there for a year. The first resident writer was the Algerian novelist and poet El Mahdi Acherchour. Anne Frank was added to the canon of the Netherlands. In 2006, a list of 50 topics intended to summarize Dutch history for students. The revised version of the canon was approved in 2020 and continues to include her story. In 2007, Bernhard Buddy Elias donated approximately 25,000 family documents to the Anne Frank house. These included family photographs and a letter Otto Frank wrote to his mother in 1945, informing her that his wife and daughters had died in concentration camps. The horse chestnut tree Anne had seen from the annex became a symbol of her story. In 2007, the tree was threatened by fungal disease and scheduled for removal. A legal case delayed the felling, but strong winds eventually toppled the tree in 2010. 11 saplings from the tree were distributed to schools, museums, and memorial sites worldwide. Anne Frank's life has inspired numerous artistic works, including ballet, choral compositions, films, literature, and television. The only known film footage of Anne shows her briefly at a neighbor's wedding. In 1999, Time magazine included Anne Frank among the most important people of the 20th century. UNESCO added her diary to the Memory of the World International Register in 2009. By 2018, more than 270 schools worldwide had been named after her, with additional schools added in later years. Memorials dedicated to Anne Frank continue to be established in multiple countries. Through museums, memorials, educational programs, and cultural works, Anne Frank's diary has continued to influence generations. Her life and writing remain widely studied, discussed, and remembered as part of global historical and cultural memory. Anne Frank did not live to see the world that would one day read her words. She never saw the millions of readers who would open her diary in classrooms, libraries, and quiet bedrooms across the world. She never knew that the private thoughts she once wrote for herself would become one of the most powerful testimonies of the 20th century. What began as a young girl's attempt to make sense of confinement, fear, hope, and growing up became a voice that continues to echo far beyond the walls of the secret annex. Her diary is not only a record of war, it is a record of becoming. A record of curiosity, frustration, ambition, faith, and resilience. Anne wrote about ordinary things while living through extraordinary circumstances. She argued with her parents. She dreamed about the future. She wondered who she might become. She questioned human nature. She hoped to write. She hoped to live. And in writing, she achieved the very thing she once wondered about. She became a writer whose words outlived her. Her story reminds us that history is not only shaped by leaders and soldiers, it is also shaped by children, families, and quiet voices hidden in small rooms. Anne Frank's life ended far too soon, but her perspective continues to help the world understand the cost of hatred, the fragility of freedom, and the importance of empathy. Today, her diary stands not only as a historical document, but as a human one, a reminder that even in darkness, people search for meaning, connection, and hope. You've been listening to Boring Biography. If this story helped you relax, unwind, or drift a little closer to sleep, consider subscribing and joining us for more calm, quiet journeys through history. For now, take a deep breath, let the day fade away, and rest. Good night.